Hey, Looney fans, you lunatics out there. I know it's been a while, and I'm sorry I've been away for so long, but I've been very busy doing a lot of projects. Today is the next part of all the Looney Tune movies, the 2000s. Who still remembers the 2000s and reminisces about the 2000s? I sure the hell do. I think the 2000s was like an extended version of the 90s. The early 2000s were. Anyway, the year 2000, Tweety's High-Flying Adventure. This movie is often forgotten, and by myself also. I recently just rewatched this. You can actually watch it like on demand, and it's Tweety's first movie. Tweety goes around the world basically in 80 days, and it's like a challenge for him. And Granny's in it, and Sylvester is trying to eat him again. What's interesting is that in the late 90s, they had the Sylvester and Tweety Mysteries cartoon. This movie feels like a movie version of Sylvester and Tweety Mysteries, basically. There is comedy in it that's very good, the comedy. I think the backgrounds are pretty lazy looking, though. What's great, though, is that they all look like they're supposed to. It's like the original version of the Looney Tunes. Tweety runs into the Looney Tunes and they make like cameos through his adventure. Bugs is like snowboarding in it. Daffy makes a joke when he runs into Daffy, and he mentions how he's making a cameo, and he's like, I wish this was my own movie. It was some joke like that. Daffy actually already had his movies. He had two movies, Daffy Duck's Quackbusters and Fantastic Island. So Daffy already had two movies. It's all about him. It's all about himself. This was Tweety's big movie. I remember it aired on TV at the time. It's funny how Marvin is here on the cover, because he does have one scene in the movie, and it's kind of weird. It's very cool to see him, though. Tweety's in like New York City. Marvin's on stilts, and because they don't explain what Marvin was doing in that scene, but I think he was pretending to be a human or something. It was weird. He was like walking around on stilts, and then the cloak is pulled from underneath him. Cool, though. I wish he was in the movie more, but whatever. The funniest scene in the movie is with Taz interacting with Sylvester and them riding the bike together. That was good. That was like funny, really funny. Tweety meets a new friend in this movie that basically becomes like his girlfriend, and it's like a pink Tweety. Her name was Auga. It's like I forgot about this movie, and I started reminiscing, and I saw this logo, and I was like, oh, I think I remember that. And it was funny, because the only thing I remembered about this entire movie was the pink Tweety bird, was the girl Tweety. That was the only thing I remembered about this entire movie. And tell me in the comments if you relate to that, because everything else about the movie just seems like it blends in with all the other Looney Tunes cartoons, so I just forgot about the entirety of the remainder of the film. I guess Auga just really stood out to me. Auga basically makes a sound, and when she does it, she like yells, and it basically sounds like a boat sound, which is weird because you'd think it would make the sound like Auga, but no, she doesn't do that. So that's weird. This Auga joke kind of, I think it's been a long time, okay? But I think I've heard this Auga joke in like the older Looney Tunes cartoons, or maybe like Tiny Toon Adventures, or like the Animaniacs. But when I heard it in those shows, like in the past, like in the 90s and shit, I remember for some reason, and maybe it's a Mandela effect, or maybe I'm just getting old, but I remember hearing that Auga sound effect before. So it's kind of weird that in the movie, when she does her famous thing, it's like she doesn't actually she doesn't say the phrase Auga. She just makes the sound of a boat. Kind of weird. But anyway, it's a pretty good movie. So it kind of reminds me of that Jackie Chan movie, Around the World in 80 Days. And that came out in 2004, so this was the year 2000, so it does remind me of that. It's like because it was both in the same era. And I think the concept of Around the World in 80 Days is like older than this movie. It's like an older thing. But this is the Looney version of it. Yeah, it's kind of a forgettable Looney Tunes movie. Like, it's cool, but I don't think there's enough jokes in it. And like I said, the backgrounds seem pretty lazy. I mean, the movie's well done, but I don't know. It's a pretty damn decent movie, and it could have been way better. I have to say about what I have to say about the 2000s is that the 2000s was like the final decade where they kept the Looney Tunes in their original version, in like their classic version. It was the final decade where they kept them the same. Anyway, moving ahead to one of my favorite movies of all time. Yes. Looney Tunes back in action. Getting a little emotional talking about this. I've never made a review about this film before, and that was very, very exciting to see it with my friends in the movie theater. It felt like a sequel to Space Jam, even though it wasn't. Although the film does reference Space Jam in like one scene where Michael Jordan appears, and Daffy's just like, well, this doesn't make a lick of sense. That was pretty funny. I mean, at the time when I was a kid, like, I wish that this was Space Jam 2 instead. I think the director of this film, and I forget his name, he was great. He did an excellent job with this film, but I didn't like his attitude when I heard him talk about this film. In the behind-the-scenes footage, he was saying how he wanted this film to be the anti-Space Jam. I mean, does it really have to be? I mean, like, in Space Jam, like, the Looney Tunes are acting just how they normally are anyway, so Space Jam ain't like some weird overhaul of the classic Looney Tunes characters. So I find that comment strange. I mean, it is similar to Space Jam. I mean, this film actually feels like a remake of Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and it contradicts the premise of Space Jam with the Looney Tunes like living underground and stuff. Like, that was way more creative than this. This has already been done before. I mean, this is an excellent movie. It's hilarious. I love this movie, but like, people underestimate like the magic of Space Jam. Like, I remember when I saw this in the theater for the first time, like, my first reaction to it was like, I was thinking, oh, well, it was alright. Like, I thought it was pretty good. But then the more I kept watching it, I was like, wow, this is amazing. Like, my first reaction to it was like, well, it's not as good as Space Jam. I mean, I still don't think it is. But it's kind of funny when people look back at this film, they always constantly, like, compare it to Space Jam. Like, whose side are you on? Like, do you want this version of the Looney Tunes or do you want the Space Jam version? And it's like, that's not how it should be. Like, I love both versions. I love both of these movies. And they're both similar anyway. I do like the idea of the Looney Tunes being secretly, like, underground or in a different location, because that actually made sense. Like, in real life, like, we don't think the Looney Tunes are real, right? But in this film, it's like they're real and they're walking around with them and everyone knows that they're real. And it's cool, but it's also weird. Like, at the time, this was 2003. Man, do I miss the 2000s. What an amazing time period. The early 2000s, actually. The late 2000s sucked. Like I said earlier, the early 2000s was the extended version of the 90s. So we had our golden 10 years of the best decade ever. 96 to like 2005. Really? I mean, that's a different video on it, all on its own. I really like the pairing also. You got Bugs with the girl and Daffy with the guy. Brendan Fraser was hilarious in it. Jenna Elfman was entertaining. And Steve Martin was Marvin Acme, and he was really funny in the movie. And his scenes actually remind me of Dr. Evil from Austin Powers. And when you think about it, Goldmember, Austin Powers, came out the same year as this, 2003. So when I rewatched Tweety's High Flying Adventure, the plot of this movie is actually similar to Tweety's High Flying Adventure. Like, in this film, they do go around the world. Like, they go to Paris, France, they go to, they're in the desert, Area 51. They go to outer space. They go to the jungles of Africa. They're going all over the place. So, I mean, it does actually feel like the plot of Tweety's High-Flying Adventure. And like Bugs and Daffy, like they encounter the other Looney Tunes through the adventure of the movie. So, that also feels like the same thing. Yeah, so it's kind of like they took the plot from this and then like expanded it. Yeah, anyway. So like I was trying to say before, 2003, like this was the time when a Space Jam 2 should have been made. I think everyone knows that. I do love Space Jam 2, but this was the time to do it. They could have done this afterwards. You know, it's just interesting. This is an amazing movie. This is the full screen edition DVD, and I also have a widescreen edition. Not an interesting story why I have both versions, but yeah, pretty cool. I always prefer the full screen version of stuff from back in the day because that's how the old TVs were. So I hated widescreen. And I still prefer full screen because I'm old school, so like fuck that widescreen shit. But you know, it does look pretty good though still in widescreen, but it's like, I don't know, there's something nostalgic about the full screen effect to me. Well, you know, for the longest time it was like Space Jam and Looney Tunes Back in Action were the most special of all the Looney Tunes movies. Like the highest budget, live action with animation, big time adventure film, heavy promotion. But now we have Space Jam 2, so now we have like a, well, I was gonna say a trilogy, but eventually they'll probably make Space Jam 3, and I support that idea. Now the original title of this film was gonna be Spy Jam, which was gonna be fucking awesome as a title, which is what the title should have been, because this film does feel like a James Bond film, because his father in the film is played by Timothy Dalton, who played James Bond in the 1980s. I'm a huge James Bond fan. I'll do another DVD King video about that. Timothy Dalton's Bond films were so amazing, so I'm a big fan of him playing Bond. So seeing him be a spy in this film as his father was hilarious, and it was a great throwback for James Bond fans. I mean, as a kid I didn't know that, but looking back now I know that. So I think the film should have been called Spy Jam. They could have called it Looney Tunes Spy Jam, just in case people didn't even know the Looney Tunes were in it, because that would have tied it in more with Space Jam. Kept continuing this trend of making these jam movies, where it's like it has the spirit of Space Jam, but it's not a direct sequel to Space Jam, and it would have had more marquee value, because how exciting would that have been back in the day, right? So the title Looney Tunes Back in Action is cool. It's got like a movie vibe to it. It's basically flat out saying they're back. They're back, and also what I have to say is that Daffy is like the star of this film. Like Bugs was the star of Space Jam, and Daffy was the star of Back in Action. So it's kind of like, since it's like kind of like the second Space Jam movie, they gave the spotlight more to Daffy. Bugs is there and he's excellent. More stuff is for Daffy in this movie, which is awesome. Voiced Bugs Bunny back in the day when this movie came out, so rest in peace to him, because I remember he died like a year or two ago, and I was really upset actually, because I thought he was such an amazing voice for Bugs Bunny. He was Bugs Bunny. Man, like the nostalgia of his voice being Bugs, and I couldn't believe he died, because then it's like, wow, we just lost the last great Bugs Bunny voice actor, like ever. These characters are so old that, yeah, you know, it's kind of hard to find other people to voice them nowadays, Doc. Yeah. So this was really like one of those final hurrahs of hearing that final good voice of Bugs. And Billy West voiced Bugs in Space Jam. And he was amazing. And I don't know why the fuck he wasn't back to do the voice for Bugs in Back in Action. Hell, I don't know why he wasn't back to do the voice for Bugs in Space Jam 2. I think I saw an interview with him talking about why he wasn't, but, still. So what about our boy Marvin? Does he have a bigger role in Back in Action than he does in Space Jam? Arguably. I guess so, you would say that, yeah. Because he's got the blue monkey, they fight him in outer space, all that shit. Yeah, like Marvin winds up being the last big villain of the film. I mean, at the end of the film, there's like 3 villains. You got the robot dog, which I think is a reference to some old cartoon. Someone told me, some obscure thing that most of us don't really know about. Then you got Marvin fighting them in outer space, and then you got Marvin Acme. Come to think of it, like Austin Powers was a huge hit, right? 3 movies, and it was a James Bond parody. And this came out in 2003, right? It feels like it's taking inspiration from the Austin Powers films. There's an excellent scene in the film where I remember people clapped when I saw it in the theater. It was when Bugs takes out his carrot saber to fight Marvin the Martian in outer space at the end of the film, where he's like, of course you realize this means war. That moment was so amazing, and it was so fucking cool to see that as a damn kid. I loved that moment. What's funny is I remember when Star Wars The Force Awakens came out in 2015, there were all these, like, people commenting and saying that Bugs Bunny's carrot saber actually looks like Kylo Ren's lightsaber. So, actually, Disney ripped off Warner Brothers. That's right. Star Wars ripped off the Looney Tunes. That's interesting, isn't it? Yeah, so anyway, one thing I want to comment about this DVD is that I don't know why it says the movie. I still don't get that. 20 years later, I still don't get why the DVD release says the movie underneath the title. The name of the movie is Looney Tunes Back in Action. That's it. It was on all the promotion, yada yada. You can look up the original poster for this, and it's the same thing as the DVD cover, and it's like, that's not there. That's not there. So why on the DVD did they put that? Did people really gonna be that stupid and they were like, oh, so the Looney Tunes are back in action, so it's not a movie? It's not the movie? What kind of dumb shit is this? Just call it Looney Tunes Back in Action on the DVD. What's with the movie bullshit? Like, we know it's the movie. And I also don't like the logo where it says the movie. I mean, it just looks like cheap looking. Like, it just kind of looks strange. That logo makes this movie look like it's like a C-rated film, and it's not. It's an A-rated film. It's just so dumb. Why the fuck did they do that? Now, by the way, when I watched this film for the first time in the theater, now this is getting very nerdy, okay? I hope I'm not going to bore you with this. But I can tell there was a moment where Daffy was going to become Duck Dodgers. You know, he's like sucking his thumb, and Bugs is fighting Marvin with the carrot saber, right? And Daffy's like, what would Duck Dodgers do? And I was like, oh, awesome, he's going to be like Duck Dodgers. And he was. It was amazing, right? Especially to see that in a live-action Looney Tunes film. Because the character of Duck Dodgers has always been a fan favorite of us Lunatics fans. A character that... a persona of Daffy. That's his most famous persona. And we always wanted to see more of that character. I mean, that version of him. And I remember at the time, I think it was a year or something, before this movie came out, they had the Duck Dodgers cartoon in the 2000's. And Daffy had a blue outfit in that cartoon. And I was actually disappointed that it wasn't aesthetically like the original version of him, where he had that green outfit with the red cape and like the thing on his head. That was really funny, and that was classic. Like, that outfit is what we know of Duck Dodgers. So I was actually disappointed with that Duck Dodgers 2000's cartoon, because I thought his outfit should have been like his classic Duck Dodgers outfit. I don't know why they changed it. That cartoon, that Duck Dodgers cartoon in the 2000's was cool. It was funny. But they gave Porky his same outfit in that cartoon with the purple. So why couldn't they do it with Daffy? So in this film, basically, coming 360 now, I can tell that moment was like he's going to turn to Duck Dodgers, and I was so worried that they were going to put him in his new blue outfit from the cartoon at the time to like promote the new Duck Dodgers cartoon. I was so worried they were going to do that. I was in my mind, I was like, no, please don't do that. Make it the classic outfit. Make it the classic outfit. And they did. They put him in his classic outfit in the movie. That is so awesome. But what I can't understand 20 years later, and I even thought about this back then, not just now, it's a mystery. Why did they decide... It's like they remembered to put Daffy in his classic Duck Dodgers outfit for the movie, but not for the Duck Dodgers cartoon. Does that make any sense whatsoever, folks? I was weary about making this video for a long time because I know that once I start talking about Looney Tunes back in action, I can talk about this movie for like 20 hours. So I don't want to do that, so let's just move on. Amazing film, probably the second best Looney Tunes movie ever made. Yeah, it's phenomenal, but we're going to have to move ahead to 2006, the last Looney Tunes movie of the 2000s, Bah Humduck, A Looney Tunes Christmas. Now, at the time, in 2006, I did not see this film. I don't think I really knew it existed. And my memory is hazy if they even aired it on television. Now, let me know in the comments if you actually saw this movie back in the day. And maybe you're like me and you didn't see it back in the day either. So I recently watched it, like last Christmas, and it was pretty awesome. Like, the animation's great. The jokes are pretty cool. Daffy's like the owner of this mall, and he's like Scrooge. So it's another, cartoon, family-friendly version of a Christmas Carol. And what I find interesting about this film is that it's actually like the Looney Tunes version of a Mickey's Christmas Carol from the 80s. That was a great version of A Christmas Carol, and like Scrooge McDuck was Scrooge. It was perfect, and Mickey was in it and all that shit. And just like in that movie, like all the ghosts of Christmas past, like Taz and Sylvester, Tweety and Granny, they visit Daffy and try to make him a better person. And he's also a duck, just like Scrooge. So this is like the Looney Tunes version of Mickey's Christmas Carol. But it's like, Disney did it first. So that's what makes this interesting. It's like, which one of those two is better? Yeah, so I like the movie. Bugs in the film doesn't really have much to do in terms of the plot. He's like a shopper and whatever. But they still give him enough screen time where he's like still awesome in it. Porky is great in it. He's memorable. Pretty classic stuff. There's a memorable scene at the beginning where Bugs almost gets hit by like a truck and he goes underneath his rabbit hole. Of course, Daffy learns his lesson by the end. And there's like a scene where Daffy is shown as a little boy, and it's pretty sad because no one wants to adopt him. And the way he looks like the same version of him from Baby Looney Tunes. So that's interesting, right? This movie is underwhelming. I mean, I don't agree with that phrase, so I have to use something else, but I like the film. It was cool, and it had moments that made me laugh, but it could have been way better. Like, it's a decent Looney Tunes classic. Yeah, it could have been way, way better, honestly. Tell me what you guys think in the comments, too. But it's really cool they even made this. Also, I noticed the logo, a Looney Tunes Christmas. The Looney Tunes logo in green right here is the same logo as the Looney Tunes blue logo for Back in Action. Same thing. Weird, right? Now, aside from these three great movies, there was actually also another Looney Tunes movie in the 2000s called Baby Looney Tunes Easter Egg Hunt, something like that. And I used to watch Baby Looney Tunes all the time, and that was a good show, classic. But I never saw that movie. I'm sure it's just like the cartoon. Yeah. Sorry I don't have a review for that one, but yeah, Baby Looney Tunes was pretty cool back in the day. It kind of had that appeal of like Hamtaro, and it was kind of like the Nick Jr. show that, like, we were too old to be watching it, but we also didn't give a shit because we loved all the cartoons they aired on Nickelodeon Cartoon Network back in the 2000s. So it's like we didn't give a shit. And it was like basically the Rugrats version of the Looney Tunes. The Looney Tunes had 4 movies in the 2000s, and they're all really good, classic stuff.